What we're going to work on today is an introduction to Lightroom as well as Photoshop. So, you've gone out, you've done your photographs for part one and part two of the assignment. You bring back your card. With a card reader, you're able to bring your images onto your computer. And so now you're ready to bring your images into Lightroom. Now I'm going to be grabbing an old file from I'm going to be grabbing a file from my passport hard drive. So let's get this started. We're going to open Adobe Lightroom Classic. This is some other images I'm working on. So we're going to go up. It's important when you open Lightroom, there's regular Lightroom and then there's Lightroom Classic. You want to be working in Lightroom Classic. The regular Lightroom is only for working on stuff that's online and sharing peer-to-peer files and so forth. It's not what you want to be using for what we're going to do in class. What we're going to do in class, I want you using Lightroom Classic, LRC. We're going to go up here and start with File, Import Photos and Videos. Okay, so once I hit Import Photos and Videos, I can then click on my passport for Mac and look for the file that I want to use. And it is a file from last year where I just did one of my photo walkabouts. And so when you hit import, all of these images come up that's on your card or in your file. What I'm going to now do is go down here and I'm going to hit uncheck all. You don't have to do this because you're going to bring in all the photos unless you see something that you don't want. But I'm going to hit uncheck all and I'm just going to then select a few photos that I'll bring in. So we'll go one, we'll bring this one in, bring that one in, bring that. Let's see how that looks. That. Just bring that one in. And then we're going to hit import. Now, like I said, when you're bringing your files in, you don't have to do the thing that I just did there, which was uncheck all. You can leave them all checked and just bring them in. Now that I've gotten the files into Lightroom, when you first bring the files in, they go into your library in Lightroom. In Lightroom, you have several different, then you have to go into Develop to actually work on the images themselves. So there's Library, Develop, Slideshow, Print, Web. We're not going to really deal with any of these for right now. What we're going to deal with is Library and Develop. You bring them in, they come into Library, you click Develop, you can then go into Develop and work on the image. So in Develop, you can completely rework the image that you've brought in. The thing that you have to remember, or the thing that you have to understand about Lightroom, is that it is taken directly from practices that were done in the darkroom, either black and white darkroom or color darkroom. So the first thing you'll notice when you look at the Lightroom interface, this Lightroom setup that you see in front of you, is on the right side, top to bottom, you've got all the tools that you need for cropping, spot removal, red eye removal. The rectangle tool allows you to darken and lighten certain areas. I'm sorry, it's not called a rectangle tool. That's what I call it. It's called the graduate filter, which means that when you use the graduate filter, you can gradually darken or lighten areas. So you click on it, you bring it down in whatever to whatever space on the image you want. You can do a little bit, you can do half, you can do three quarters, you can do the whole image. And what you do is you can change the exposure in certain areas, and it graduates. It doesn't all change in the same way. So you see how this is gradually going from dark to lighter. And you pull it down. I'm sorry, it's going from dark to lighter. You pull it down, and you can do this to more of the image. And within that space, you can change the color by adding more warmth, and you're not changing the color. You can um, adjust the color, I should say, because you're not changing. It's not going from blue to green. It's going from, blue to a warmer blue, or it's going from magenta to a more greener look. So in that way, you're changing that color tint, okay, or you're adding or subtracting. And this stuff is based on the old color wheel that you would use in printing, in making prints. If something was too green, you would add magenta. If it was too magenta, you would add green or take away magenta. That kind of printing was called subtractive printing, where you would play with the three color dials. Um, Red, no, you would play with the color dials were yellow, magenta, and green. And you would adjust those three to get the colors that you wanted in the color darkroom. Well, you're doing the same here with this. So this is the graded tool. And if you don't like that, you just hit reset. That's the beautiful thing about using Lightroom. Whatever you don't like, you can reset it. That, again, if I haven't mentioned this before, that is called non-destructive editing. You never destroy your original. Your original is always there, and you can rework it in any way you want to. So that was the graded tool. This is the what I call the lasso tool. What is the correct name for it? I'm not seeing the correct name pop up, but I call it the lasso tool. And what you do with this is you just create this oval, and then you can bring down the rest of the area around the object that you're wanting to highlight. So you make the rest of the image darker. You can change the color saturation a bit, make it a little warmer, add a little magenta. Let's bring this out a little more. Okay, and then bring this outside down a bit. We can make the contrast a little stronger on that outside image. And click on that. And so that's what our image looks like. And then we could take the magic wand and we can lighten up a certain area in the image, because we decided we wanted that area to be a little lighter than the rest. And the cool thing about using the magic wand is once you've done your initial bit of work, you can then also adjust that. So we can add a little yellow there. We can bring down the highlight or bring up the highlight in that area. We can make the darkness a bit richer. So you can adjust, work different areas in the image. And if you like that, you think, okay, I'm going to try that in some other area. What you would do is click on new, and within this, it gives you a new brush to work with. So you can adjust this other area, and this one stays cool. So now what you do is you go over here, and we'll bring this size down by pressing the left bracket on our keyboard. And let me bring up the exposure before I even touch this tree. So we'll bring up the exposure a bit, and then go into the tree and work it. Lighten it up a bit. Okay, and we're going to add a little magenta there. See what it looks like. It doesn't look that great. Let's try completely removing the saturation and just making that area black and white, or whatever this ugly little color is. So we've got that area. Let's bring the exposure down just a bit so the edges don't look so white. But we've got that area. We've done that bit of weirdness with it. Okay, so there's that area, right? Click that, and there's how the image looks. And if we want to adjust, look at these, let's lighten this area just a bit. So already it's light, it's much lighter, but we can just work that area a bit. That's cool. Hit new again. Let's lighten this traffic cone just a bit. And I'm just doing this so you can see how intricate you can get. And we'll hit new one more time. I'm going to bring this up, because over here this has just disappeared into darkness, and I'm not really crazy about how that looks. So I'm going to bring this area up just a bit so that it isn't such a black hole of negative space in our image. Going to hit new one more time and bring up this area down here. Okay, hit it one more time. I'm going to bring up this area over here. And the reason I keep hitting new is because I want these all to be their own density. I don't want to, because if I just worked on one, with one brush, we wouldn't have varying ideas of light within the space. And I like that. I like playing with that idea. And so voila, this is what we've done with the image. We've darkened certain areas, lightened certain areas, added warmth, added cool in certain areas, brought out, on the right down here, brought out the shadows some more. And that's what we can do with the Magic Wand. Now, let's reset this whole thing. The other thing you can do is so that's your first set of tools you encounter. Then you go down, there's black and white. So you can just straight up change the image to black and white. Play with your contrast, make it a different kind of black and white. You can, if you don't like that as black and white, you reset it and go back to color. So Black and white, then you go down, you have your color temperature, so you can make it hot yellow. You can add magenta, make it magenta or green or blue, or find some kind of balance in there, okay? You can change the exposure, make it darker, make it lighter. You can change the contrast, make the colors richer by changing the contrast. If you have a highlight somewhere in there that is a bit too much, you can bring down the highlights. So like the white areas within the image, like this, the white area of the cone. If the sky is a bit too hot in a certain area, you could adjust that by just changing the highlight. You can adjust the shadows, move back out, and boom, all of a sudden the shadows open up a bit on you over here, right? This is what they looked like before. You open that up, a little more range to your image, a little more depth to your image, okay? You can change the whites. You can bring it up, bring it down. Now, changing the whites and changing the blacks changes the overall image. I mean, anything you do to the image as you're doing these adjustments will have some effect on the overall image. So you're constantly playing a balancing act, okay? Change the blacks, so you bring it down. You make the overall image darker, so again, you have to pay attention to that. I don't use texture much. In my images, so I never mess with texture. I use clarity. Clarity helps you give the image a little more pop in the shadow areas, but you have to be careful with clarity in some images because it just starts to look a bit grainy and odd if you go too far with it. The haze is for those times when you're shooting in foggy, hazy kind of conditions, and that's not really necessary. In a lot of my images, like I don't shoot on overcast or hazy, or I don't shoot too much when it's not sunny. Like for the type of work that I do and the way I like to look at light, I shoot mostly in very sunny, clean, clear conditions when I shoot outside. Then there's vibrance, which is gives the image some vibrance, some pop, kind of opens up, help accentuate your color. And then saturation makes your color richer or takes away from your color. All right, so that is your set of tools over here. And then you have your adjustment scale. I think I might be calling that the wrong thing, but you can bump up it. It's the adjustment curve. I'm sorry, not scale, curve. So you can bump up color, bump up highlights, so you can drop down in the shadow, you can bring them up in the highlights. When you're playing with the curve, you can get some really interesting looking things happening in your image. And if you don't like any of it, you go back and reset. Now there's other stuff below this that I'll get to later, but for right now, these set of tools is what I want you to deal with. Over here you have a bunch of pre-selects where you can change the color, get some really interesting looking tonal colors, tonal range, I should say, not tonal colors, but tonal range, so you can get warm contrast, vintage, a soft mist. I don't want you to use any of these right now. Kind of, especially black and white. I want you to stick with just the natural color. I don't want you to use these preset colors, but I think it's important to show you that they're over here, to show you that there's other defaults for grain and sharpening and vignetting and all that sort of stuff. And we'll get into that later. For right now, I want you to stick with as normal color as you can. I don't want you to change your images to black and white or any of that sort of stuff right now. For right now, go out, you shoot whatever you shoot. When you turn it in, I want you to keep the color as natural looking as possible. Okay? So that's it for the tools that I want you to deal with in Lightroom. You can also move your image when you're working in Lightroom. You can move your image into Photoshop very easily by just going Command E. I can't remember what the command is on a PC. Crap. Anyway, you'll know what it is. The same thing you use for, what do they say on a PC? I can't remember. But here's what you got. So you hit Command E on a Mac. If you're in Lightroom, then the image goes into Photoshop. And in Photoshop, it's easier to work on some of the things. Like, for instance, now when you bring an image into Photoshop, I always I always recommend that you create a layer that you work on. So your original layer, when you look in your layers palette in Photoshop, you have all these different, palettes to work with. So there's a layers panel, and in layers, let me show you. When you open Photoshop, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, so you're going to come down to layers, click on layers. You're going to hit Command J on your keyboard, and that's going to give you another layer. It's going to give you a layer that you're going to work on. And layer is just like, for the lack of a better term, let's say it's like you're doing some tracing, and you've got, a beautiful book, and you open it up to a picture or a painting or whatever, and you put down some tracing paper, and you draw on that. Well, this is what basically a layer is. It gives you a piece that you can do work on. So layer one, you're going to do the work on layer one, and the background's going to remain cool. So we're going to just call layer one cleanup. I always recommend that you name your layers so you don't confuse yourself as you're working through the image. The way you name a layer is when it shows up, it'll just be layer one. So you double click on layer one and call it, for now we'll call this cleanup. So cleanup, and yeah, just leave it as cleanup. Hit return. That is now the name. All right, and then you can, now I also recommend that when you're working in layers, now I use a Wacom tablet and a pen to do my retouching, simply because it works. It helps me retouch faster. So I always bring the image up a bit when I work on it. It just helps. I can see what I'm doing better, and it's just a good idea to bring it up so you're not. Now I've grabbed here the spot healing brush, and I'm just gonna take off some of these little spots. And I'm doing this to show you how simple it is to do some spot healing. And what the spot healing brush does is it just samples from around the area that you're working on to help you get rid of some of these unsightly things. Now I'm not doing a bang up job here. This looks a bit wacky, but I just want you to get what I'm talking about as far as spot healing. And so you just clean up a few little things. We're not trying to remake the truck, but just, I should say we're not trying to remake the trailer, but just clean up a few little things here and there. All right, so we've done a little cleaning up here. Let's bring this down. So this is what it looks like now. You can click on this. That's what it looked like before. Look like now, before, now. So you see how that works? We've just gotten rid of a few things. In Photoshop, like the first couple of things I'll have you do is pretty simple. So I just want you to, whatever you're working with, if you need to do some cleaning up on it, get rid of a few things, try doing this, taking it into Photoshop, creating a layer, a cleanup layer on your image, doing your cleanup. And then when you're done with your cleanup, all you do is, let's move this out of the way. All you do is Command Save or Command S, not Command S to save. Instead of going File, Save, Command S is the shortcut, or you can also just go File, Save. Well, you can't do save now, but because it's already been saved. So you hit Command S or File Save, and when you do that, it goes back to Lightroom. So here we are in Lightroom again. Here's the original, right? The original, because you can see all the marks that I got rid of. And then here's the new one that I just did in Photoshop. All right. So you've retouched it. You've cleaned it up a bit. Now you're going to export it. And the way that you export things, well, the first thing that you do before you export anything is you set up a folder for where you're going to export the image to. I've created a folder on the desktop. The folder is folder X. I'm now going to go to export this image. I'm going to go File, Export. We're going to pick a specific folder. Okay, it's going to go to a specific folder. We'll hit Choose. And now the folder that we're going to use is on the desktop. So we go Desktop. There's X. We click on X. There's a couple of images in it. We'll hit Choose. And then I'm just going to go down here. You're exporting this image as the format's going to be JPEG. The quality is going to be 100. The color space is sRGB. The width and height, you're exporting it in inches. It's going to be inches. When you go here, it can be pixels, inches, or centimeters. You're going to export your image. If it's a horizontal, you're going to export your image at 11 inches wide by 8.5 inches high. Your resolution is going to be 72 pixels per inch. Okay? So 11 high, 11 wide, 8.5 high, 72 pixels per inch on the resolution. All right, that's what you're exporting your image as. Hit Export. Up here, it'll say Export one file. You'll see this gray line come up. When the gray line disappears, your image has been exported. Okay? For the assignment, you've shot part 1 and part 2. What you're going to do is choose 3 images from part 1, 3 different images. You should have shot 3 different times of the day. You should have done a bunch of different ideas. You're going to choose what you think are the 3 best images from part 1. Then you're going to choose what you think are the 3 best images from part 2. Again, you should have shot in 3 different times of the day, but 3 images from part 1, 3 images from part 2, export them all. On the images, if you're exporting a vertical, the vertical should be 11 inches high by 8.5 inches wide at 72 pixels per inch. If it's a horizontal, 11 wide by 8.5 high at 72 pixels per inch. All right? Makes sense? I hope it does. All right, cool.